to the Student Outcomes podcast. My name's Sarah Duran, and I'm co-founder, research director at Cosmos. And in today's conversation, it's actually something that I've been really looking forward to. We've actually just had a conversation, haven't we, Miranda?
We have indeed, yeah.
In the webinar. So a trauma-informed way of being. So please do listen to that as well. But something we're getting into today is something we've been exploring in our own national research, and that's hidden drivers of choice for students and why students might make some of the decisions that they do when it comes to university and making those decisions, and looking at the role that trauma may play in that. And the choices for young people, and also what it means to work in a trauma-informed way. So we'll be talking through that a little bit more with Miranda today. So I will introduce Miranda. So my guest is Miranda Arieh, and she's a multi-award-winning motivational speaker, mental health educator, and trauma consultant as well. She is the founder of the pioneering Heroes program and its signature SAVE method, an approach to mental health and trauma recovery, which is grounded in her own lived experience. This is now being delivered through the NHS in Leeds, and it's also being rolled out across the UK. And some of you may have actually seen Miranda in national media. So she's appeared on the BBC's One Show, she's been on Channel 4, she's been on ITV News, she's presented for BBC Radio. So you're obviously very comfortable in the studio, Miranda. So Miranda, it's really lovely to have you here. Welcome. And yes, let's get started.
Let's crack on into it all.
Indeed. So I really wanted to start right back at the beginning, because your story is kind of central to everything that you do. I suppose take us there.
Sure. So really it's a long journey, and I came from a very unsettled way of life from being a young child, and had a very unsettled home life, which was really unsafe in many ways, in an emotional and physical sense. Which led to me running away repeatedly in my early teenage years, getting put in a couple of safe houses, like Leeds Safe House, and then being put in foster care. Shortly after being in foster care, I ended up getting sectioned under the Mental Health Act because I was classed as a risk to myself. I was harming myself quite badly at that time in my life, really suffering with my own mental health. And in hospital, I would say that, the approach that was used with me wasn't what I would call trauma-informed. Obviously, I don't even know if that was a term that was used back then. It's a real shame, but I don't think it was a term that was used. And following coming out of hospital, and actually, in all honesty, becoming quite traumatized in the mental health system. I would say added another layer to my to the trauma I'd already experienced in my life, the traumatic experience, should I say, that I'd already experienced in my life. Hospital was again a very traumatic place for me, and many of the young people who were in there, there was lots of control taken away from us and lots of punishment when we were distressed. Padded cells were still used back then. We're talking like, I'm 42 now, I was 14 back then, so 26-ish years ago. The padded cells, I think they were called like safe rooms or something like that. Didn't feel safe, padded rooms, and restraint was used very regularly. When we were, getting, in inverted commas, heightened, and really there was distress under the surface. I understand now, we weren't bad kids. I was not a bad kid. I was uprising against a system that was feeling really unsafe. And, cut forward a few years, I ended up a rebound patient in the mental health system, repeatedly receiving, I guess in inverted commas again, treatments, which further re-traumatized me. There was nothing really getting to the root. And then later on in life, in my 30s, I started discovering education around presence, presence as in, recognizing I am not my thoughts. And, oh my goodness, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my feelings. Started, discovering even spiritual texts that really changed my life, and education on how trauma manifests, how traumatic experiences influence the nervous system. And I started doing all my own research and becoming very obsessed.
So you doing the work, that was the catalyst for you.
And working on myself. And at this time I was already working in lots of different mental health charities, and I was like, oh my God, why the hell wasn't I taught any of this
Yeah.
in the many, many years that I was within the mental health system. Why was I not taught any of this? And so Heroes, the program which I founded, the E stands for education. I believe that education is power. And, that's really what's driven me with a mission to try and change things for the better and support equal, fair chances for education in an emotional sense and academic sense for people who come from backgrounds of complex trauma.
So thanks for sharing that. I suppose it's one that's really kind of very much rooted in your own experience, and you've been at the fore of that. You've been able to see that and experience that kind of viscerally and physically and all of that, and then you've taken that energy and then put it into something kind of positive, really positive, and that comes on quite nicely actually to your work. So tell us a bit more about Heroes, what it actually is, who it's for, how it works. Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so Heroes has been a great love and passion project for me, and traditionally it's been an 8-week, 20-hour group work program. Heroes stands for healing, education, and recovery of emotional strength. And I wrote it for people who are struggling with their mental health in any defined way, whether it was self-defined or otherwise, people who've been through vast diagnostic criteria in the mental health system and beyond. I designed it in primary care, in a GP surgery in lockdown, where I started bringing people together, teaching them tools that had worked for me in my own life, in my own recovery journey, which I am still on and will always be on. I want to get very real that recovery is not an end point to get to. And this is what we teach our participants. And it involves supporting people to build a better relationship with themselves as a vital foundation to being able to build a better relationship with others in the world around them as well. But it's the relationship with the self that we focus on. We focus on inner child healing. As far as we know, we're the first people to ever bring inner child healing into the NHS mental health system.
Wow. So for context, it's being delivered in NHS in Leeds right now, and then it's being rolled out. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. We've got a model where I go in and deliver 8 days worth of training with any level staff. They don't have to be experienced at all. That's the what we've found. I've trained people, patient ambassadors who've never worked in mental health in their life, and deliver a training with them so they can run Heroes themselves, so it can be placed in many different organisations quite swiftly and effectively. And the outcomes are still what we've seen in the pilots that we've done, even citywide or in smaller organisations. The outcomes are very consistent, and we take people into rooms and explore belief systems with them that they've created as a response to difficult experiences in their life. We dig deep into identity and shifting senses of self, how people feel about themselves. And the changes that we see are very dramatic and really powerful. And people love that it comes from lived experience.
So is this for staff then, or is this for patients, or is it for, like you said, it's for everybody? So in the, we will keep referencing the webinar because there are other things that we've spoken about there. So in the webinar, we had educators on there. We were talking about choice, young students, and how trauma might show up for those young students. Yeah. And then also, I suppose for that one, that was more about actually how educators can have more trauma-informed conversations, whereas this program is, so please do listen. If that's something that's relevant for you, please do go and have a listen to the webinar. But I suppose Heroes, this is more of a self-reflective tool for the self.
It absolutely is. It's a healing journey that people go on together in group work settings, although we have just created a self-paced program for people who want to do it by themselves in their own time at home via pre-recorded videos. But in the NHS, it's placed as a group work program. And so the Heroes program itself goes to people who have been through either complex childhood trauma, people who may have attracted diagnoses such as, and I'm going to put this in big inverted commas, borderline personality disorder, emotionally unstable personality disorder, which I believe the term needs to be abolished. But the NHS is sending people with these diagnoses, which are previously diagnoses of exclusion from services. They're sending them to Heroes with dramatic results. People with complex PTSD, people who've been through difficult events, but really anyone can join Heroes who's struggling with their mental health.
So it's for the patients.
It is. But the model is that I go in to train staff to run Heroes. So there's an 8-day training.
I see. Yeah.
And then they can run Heroes themselves. Yeah.
Oh, Oh, amazing. So we talk about the SAVE method,
Yeah.
and that being quite central to the program. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that and what's involved? And I suppose anybody who's listening who might recognize that there's maybe some healing in themselves to do, so things that they can do. Sorry, there's a few questions in there.
Oh, no, absolutely. So
yeah.
I can certainly guide through the SAVE method, which really is a signature method from within Heroes program. And really, essentially, we work with the idea that within us all, we have a higher self. I think for those of you watching on video, I can do a hand diagram, and those of you listening, I'll try and explain it without the visual. But we have a higher self within us, untouched by conditioning, the truth of who we are. And within us, we also have an egoic self, we call it, which is the false ideas we create about ourselves in response to difficult circumstances. I am not worthy. I'm not safe here. I am abandonable, rejectable, whatever that is for each person. So we have the conditioned self and the higher self. And when we get triggered or we're in suffering, they become a mesh like this. So we're identifying with the suffering. We're mistaking it for who we are. We might even mistake our behaviors for who we are, or the actions we've taken from a place of pain for who we are. But we work in a way which we call in Heroes self-relating, where we're able to create a split as we start to observe. We become the watcher of the suffering rather than identifying with it. And we use language such as, there is a part of me that feels. And what this does is it gives us space to separate from the emotion in order to connect to it. And then we start bringing through the love and compassion that is needed for that part of us in suffering. So in essence, we are working in a very different way to a lot of traditional mental health treatments. I mean, even that word treatment cure, where we are not saying you need to get rid of the anxiety. We're going to stop the anxiety. We're going to cure it. We're going to treat it. We don't talk about that at all. We don't look to get rid of any single part of us in suffering or stop any single part of us. Our aim, the way we work in Heroes, is we want to bring them closer. So we start to bring parts of us that we may have ostracized, parts of us in suffering, we start to bring them closer and build safe relationships with the parts of us that are wounded, the parts of us that are afraid, parts of us that don't feel worthy or feel they don't belong or not good enough. The parts pushing people away when we need the love the most, whatever it is for you. We start working with building relationships with our suffering and relationships with the pain. And it's quite profound for a lot of people. They're like, oh my God, we're not here to get rid of it. And we say, no, we're not here to get rid of anything that's rising in you in the present moment. We're here to not resist. We enter non-resistance, and SAVE comes from that. And would it be useful for me to just guide people through
absolutely.
SAVE? Yeah. So
amazing.
SAVE method is a 4-step method which I created in response to lots of Heroes students and participants in our group saying, oh, I'd love, like, I forget all this in the moment of suffering. I forget all it. And obviously we have big nervous system responses which hijack our bodies, and we feel like we become the suffering. So I created an easier way to remember what we're doing. And SAVE is an acronym like Heroes is. And I'll just guide you through each step. So S is we stop, see, and surrender. So the first step is simply noticing I've been triggered, or noticing I have a thought that's beating myself up again and again and again. I'm overthinking again and again and again. Oh my God, why did I say that? Why did I do this? Or, oh my God, I'm worried about that thing I'm going to do, worried about a what if. And we notice and we just go, okay, I see I'm in suffering. I'm going to stop and take time to be with this experience, and I'm going to surrender to what is rising within me instead of distracting, avoiding. I need to get rid of this anxiety. This is so horrible to feel.
Because it doesn't feel nice. You want to get rid of it, don't you?
Yeah. But I mean, I always say it's like pushing against the door, where imagine emotions are pushing through like a wave through a door, and we're trying to push it shut. Shut. Well, if those emotions need to be felt, held, seen, validated, we're pushing against that door. It's just going to come stronger to try and get through. So we enter non-resistance. We stop, we see, we surrender. I stop to take time to be with this experience. We move into allow, accept, approve, and ask. So we move into a conversation. Like I said before, we're separating from that part of us. We use the language. There is a part of me that feels, so that we can connect to it from our higher self. We might call it, or the truth of who we are. Some people call it adult self. But and it might look like us saying, okay, anxiety. We might feel where it sits in the body and go, I approve of you being here. I accept you exactly as you are. I accept this experience rising in me of suffering. It's really hard.
It feels quite meditative in a way.
Oh yeah, it really is, and it really can be, and a lot of people do go quite deep with it. But I mean, I've done it when I've been like literally in a conversation with someone, or taken myself off to the bathroom to save myself.
Okay.
All our students call it, I was saving myself last night. We can do it very quickly, but you can enter a deep meditative place with it. So I accept you exactly as you are. I allow this experience to be here exactly as it is. And we might breathe with it. We might feel where it is in the body. I allow it. I'm not going to push against that door. I'm going to just allow it to rise. And then I might start to ask. That might be another A we bring in. What is the fear here? What's going on for you? We start inquiring. What is going on? What are you scared of? Why is this thought keep coming back? Then we move into V, validate, not victimize. Okay, so once we've allowed that emotion to be there, we're not pushing against that door anymore. We're allowing it safely and gently to rise within us. And I always encourage people to lay their hand over the space they feel it in the body, because the body needs to be connected with two, the bodily experience. And validate is all around pouring through. As human beings, so many people, we go, I shouldn't be feeling this way. God, I've only got to do that, thing tomorrow. Why am I so scared? I wish I wasn't scared. Instead of just going, well, actually it makes sense why you're scared. Or of course you're afraid of rejection. Of course you're beating yourself up. You made that mistake because you're so scared that people aren't going to like you. And that was a really painful thing for you in the past. And it didn't feel unsafe. It didn't feel safe when people didn't like you in the past. So we're pouring in validation for our own suffering, that makes sense. I get why I'd be feeling this way. Or we might speak to the part of us. I get why you'd be feeling this way. Some people visualize an inner child part, whatever works for you. We don't victimize. We're not delving around in like, oh my God, we don't want to pour in like pity or victimization, but the validation. I get why this is hard. Of course you're worried about that. It is scary, public speaking or whatever it is. Yeah, validating. And then moving through into the final stage, which is embrace. And embrace is all around the relationship with self. When we embrace, we are not looking to reassure about the external situation. Everything's going to be fine. We're not pouring on a mantra over the top. Oh, don't worry, you are worthy. We're not doing that. We're going, okay, even if everyone rejects you, I will not reject you. I'm not going to abandon you anymore. No matter what happens in that situation, I will not beat you up. You are safe with me. So we're reassuring and embracing from within the relationship to self. And then the other E we might put on the end is engage.
So it's almost like being kind to yourself in a way.
Really? Yeah, absolutely.
I feel that because
yeah,
you can sometimes be, I imagine people listening to this as well who, you've got work, you've got other commitments outside of work, all of these things. And it's kind of like, oh, why haven't I done that? Or I've not done this yet, or I'm late for that. Or, there's all these pressures in everyday life, I think. And then they build up and then we're always on, aren't we? We're always on the email. I'm very guilty of that myself. But it's kind of giving yourself that space and being a bit kinder to yourself. Not as critical. It's hard to not be critical, isn't it?
Absolutely. But one thing I did find when I started working with people with self-compassionate practices, that a lot of the time, like the self-love movement and self-compassion, or the phrase, oh, just be kind to yourself, da, 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 da. I mean, it's obviously the most beautiful thing to be in the world. However, if we just go straight into that, like, it's not as simple as that.
Yes,
a lot of the
yeah.
time, this society breeds like a quick fix mantras.
Yeah, we all want quick fixes.
Yeah. Just love yourself.
And you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or just say this mantra every day and you'll be fine.
And people are like, why isn't this working? But unless we actually allow experiences to rise in us and meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
We can't change anything that we're not bringing awareness to. It's like trying to stick a plaster on a broken leg and expecting it to heal. So without the other elements, it somehow doesn't get there. Yeah.
So you need to have that acceptance bit before you then. So it's almost skipping. We generally like saying society, there is a lot of kind of these mantras and, all of these kind of quicker fixes in a way, but it's doing the work before that. And I love what you said earlier about actually it's a consistent thing. It's not just you do this and then it's fine. It's something that needs to almost be consistently worked at.
It's like a muscle. I call it an emotional sitter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be great if it was that easy, wouldn't it? I'm noticing I'm feeling capable. Just tell yourself you are capable. You are capable. And we have to validate the part of us that feels incapable and hear it and see it and be with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So bringing in, I suppose, some evidence generally for people kind of listening who work with young people, or I suppose young adults in a sense, because we go all the way through to university. How common is trauma really? And, what's it doing in the developing mind? And again, I know we've spoken a little bit about this in the webinar, so please do listen if the people want to hear about that. But how common is it in young people, would you say? Is there any evidence on that?
Yeah, well, stats shift all the time as our understanding of trauma shifts all the time. Obviously, we've got lists of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and that list is expanding. I think earlier this year, actually, it has again expanded. However, a broader sense of trauma, meaning that living, breathing wound that we live with, which might look like a belief system of the beliefs we create about ourselves, the world, and others that we've referred to in the webinar. That conditioning, we're all conditioned. Every single one of us is conditioned, and some of us are conditioned to believe I'm capable, I'm strong, I'm flexible minded, I'm worthy of love, it's safe to be seen, etc. Some people, that's conditioning. When we talk about trauma, I would say it's a fear-based conditioning, which stems around a threat to one of our survival or connection drives that we have as children. How safe we feel and how loved we feel, or how much a sense of belonging or connection we feel. When those drives within us that we are all hardwired for as human beings have been repeatedly threatened, and our nervous system has been sent into a state of hypervigilance. That if we imagine the nervous system as an alarm system that's been really wired very, to perceive any slight threat to survival or connection, if there's been that repeated wound that's occurred to those survival connection drives, that's what trauma is. And really, as the meaning of trauma starts to expand and be broadened in some way, which is happening right now, we are in it's very fast growing, this field, of trauma research, which is, I think it's magnificent. I love it. I love that a buzz phrase is trauma informed practice right now. I think it's fantastic. But as we stretch that, actually, we might even see that trauma can be as much as being, repeatedly told you have to go. I'm trying to think of an example. Go hug your Uncle Harry. I don't want to. I don't want to. Go do it, because the parent might be through their own conditioning, feel like they need to be seen as acceptable to belong and stay connected and don't want to be perceived as rude. That child, of course, it's definitely it's a different form of trauma than someone repeatedly being abused. That parent might adore that child, but they're being taught to breach their bodily boundaries.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to use that as an example. I'm trying to think of a very more surface level example.
Mhm.
That's still damaging. That's still someone that's being conditioned with a fawn trauma response, which is a people-pleasing trauma response. I need to avoid my own needs, my own boundaries to be accepted and loved, because I learned that my mum's going to like me more
If
when
I do that,
and we're
yeah.
hardwired for connection and survival. So if we broaden the term what trauma means, it's like, oh my goodness,
There's a
have we
lot that
all?
sits underneath it, isn't
Have
there?
we? Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, we then have really trauma. Some trauma teachers call it trauma with a big T, which is where there's been huge physical safety at risk. You know, I won't go into too much detail, but for me, my bodily I was not safe physically in childhood. You know, my nose was broken by my caregiver, and I've still got a piece of lead stuck in my leg. There was physical, when there's physical violence there, obviously then that nervous system will just be on more high alert, if you know what I mean. So there's varying degrees, but I would also say alongside that, there's no order of difficulties in healing trauma. And I know that might sound a bit wild to say that, but there is such thing as post-traumatic growth, and there's no order of difficulties in healing trauma. And I know that might sound really hard to get our heads around, but when the mind starts to click into reconditioning, that is a sometimes I've seen people who've been through profoundly, almost horrifying events, and when they start to do the work, they might progress even faster than someone who might have more, you know, what we'd call. I think that's still traumatic. So a child being forced to do something to please others, you know.
Yeah, so
but
like you say, there's varying degrees.
varying degrees, yeah.
So, yeah, so like the big T and the. So we'll come back to the post-traumatic growth, because that's something that we were generally talking about off this, weren't we? And I suppose in terms of how that shows up, then what's the line between something being just hard and then something genuinely being traumatic developmentally? Because I suppose there's a bit of a boundary and a line there. And I know just from speaking to a lot of educators who are on the front line, those are actually who are working in mental health services in universities, the number of referrals, the number of cases that are coming through from students has gone up significantly. You know, and I've spoken to a lot of people who have worked in these services across the UK, universities across the UK. So it seems to be like a common trend that this is just growing, that young people just have this inability to almost to cope. So what is, I suppose, what's the difference between something just being hard and something being traumatic? And it's
absolutely.
it's that line, isn't it?
It is all around threat. It's all around that threat of survival and connection again. So if we use that same example again of a child being taught, and this can be many different examples that we could do. It's just a form, a child being told to do something so that they're loved more or connected to. There is a huge difference between a child being conditioned to be, you know, go do that, good girl, good boy, whatever it is. There's a big difference between that or like, I can't believe you didn't do that. You are a rude, bad. I'm not talking to you for the rest of the day. Or you get hit because you were rude and you didn't. There's a big difference here. One is traumatic. One is conditioning. I mean, there's many different, you know, situations this could come across. It's just a simple example, but it's how much at threat was that safety and connection? How were you maybe punished, criticized? You know, have you been called a name for, you are such a rude, you know, were you ignored? What level of threat was there? How much fear-based conditioning is in there? If that makes sense on some level. So there is huge varying levels in that, because actually it might not harm someone that much at all. They might learn that to be a people pleaser a bit, but it's not going to, it maybe might have a significant impact on their sense of self and identity and ability to, you know, navigate the world in a confident way. But if someone's actually being punished for not pleasing, if that makes sense, that slight nuance there. And what is also seen in people who've experienced traumatic experiences, such as, you know, for example, assaults, accidents, 2 children might have been through a very similar or exact same scenario of a traumatic experience. However, if there is a ceiling put on the suffering of that child, they've been met where they're at, they've been believed, they've been held through it, they've had the support they've needed, it's been seen, it's been validated, it's been heard, their emotions have been expressed and held, and effectively the word contained, that experience has been contained. What's bizarrely seen is there will not be such a significant lasting trauma wound. Whereas in a child that doesn't have that stuff, the exact same experience they could have,
Wow. Yeah.
but the lasting trauma wound will come from my suffering has never been seen, validated, heard.
Wow.
And
And
the
that's
last,
them for life, isn't it?
yeah,
It stays with someone for
it
life.
really does. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
how our difficult experiences held. And that's why it can be a teacher in a school that does this stuff. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be the
Yeah.
caregiver. A teacher in a school can change. We have such great power in the educational system, people working in the educational system, because you might be the first person that's validated a child's experience or seen that stuff was going on and that they might be suffering in a certain way. And I do wish that, I sometimes reflect and go, oh God, what if someone would have noticed at school what was going on
Yeah.
in my home?
So what do you think could change? So I suppose I feel like, so when we talk about these conversations with other educators in this
Yeah.
space, it feels like actually in schools there is that element, in primary schools particularly, of trying to recognise trauma and safeguarding and all of that, but it almost peters out
Mm-hmm.
as students get older. I suppose what is the thing that we need to be looking at or implementing as students kind of get older and work their way through the education system to kind of help support them in that? What can we do?
Yeah. And it's all around connection. And I'd say, the words attunement, being emotionally attuned to our young people in educational settings. And, it's very challenging when you're a teacher and you've got 30 kids in your class. How on earth do I stay emotionally attuned here? But I guess, we have to take on the role as people working in education that we are role models, that people learn by examples, how able we are to stay regulated, how able we are not to take a child's behavior personally, for example, and, to be emotionally attuned, not only to each individual child, but also the dynamic in a classroom setting and be able to observe cues. I know in the webinar, we've spoken a bit about those cues as precursors to fight. There's always some smaller cues of someone, talking badly of someone else or complaining, or even, in school settings, sometimes it can be someone repeatedly, saying they feel poorly, etc. Noticing these little cues and when to step in with emotional attunement.
And how might that show up for young adults then? Because I know we did cover off quite a bit the students in secondary school in the webinar, but I suppose for the young adults actually coming into higher education, if it's not been dealt with, something that kind of follows them through, what might that look like?
Yeah. Well, it certainly can look like disengagement, which I know we've spoken about in the webinar, like that sort of flight trauma response, and for all sorts of different reasons. It also might look like, a lot of drug problems can start in those years of formal higher education as a means to cope, or, I'd say with undiagnosed neurodivergence, a lot of the time to self-medicate, because the educational setting can be so set up for the neurotypical mind, the long hours, there's a whole wider systemic conversation that could be had about implementing more breaks, for example, or, for the neurodivergent, by making the whole educational setting neurodivergent friendly, which would benefit everyone.
Yeah.
Instead of...
So it's not like a this or a that. It's actually doing this would almost just be a better step forward, a better way.
This is it. Yeah. Something that's very human friendly is neurodivergent friendly. Clarity, sensory environments in educational settings. And, I guess we do have to really watch out for cues, that we've spoken about in the webinar, that the cues that a child might not be doing so well, or a young person or a young adult might not be doing so well. as there is a tendency at that age to start looking for external things to regulate, which might be
I
attachments
see.
to people that might not be good for us, or attachments to regulating through potentially drugs and alcohol. I don't think that topic's spoken about enough. The amount
Yeah.
of I've done many projects with drug and addiction charities, and often it's started the drug and addiction issues have started in university.
How interesting is
Yeah,
that? Okay.
yeah, drug and alcohol issues can be quite. And again, like, the addiction's not the problem. An addiction is always an attempt to solve a problem.
And I suppose in that world of, when you're at university, you're around that, you possibly around that a little bit more, you're freer,
Yeah,
you're not at home. And culturally it's acceptable in a way, to not saying that drugs are acceptable.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
clarity, disclaimer there. But I
yeah.
suppose it's acceptable to have a drink, to go out. And
This is it.
I think that's, within the reasonable boundaries, that's part of your, making your way in the world, isn't it?
Yeah,
And kind
yeah.
of everybody's got to go through that journey. But I suppose it's when it tips over, if people are trying to mask or hide something, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel like there could be so much done. Like, we have like sex education lessons
Mm-hmm.
in primary school, etc., which carry on into secondary school, or you know, the, I do feel like there needs to be running through the whole academic system, certainly in university,
Yeah.
well-being sessions that are part of the curriculum, where
Yeah.
emotional health is looked at, and there's
Mm-hmm.
education around nervous system responses. And, again, it's stuff that I wish I'd have learned. And I think the whole nation could do with learning about how to self-regulate, because unfortunately a child that's not been co-regulated with, as in they've not had that containment, that emotional attunement, they won't learn to self-regulate.
And then when they get to university and they're on their own,
And they learn, okay, I can
yeah,
regulate through
through
drugs,
drugs or
or
alcohol,
I can
yeah.
regulate through, attachments to people, or I can regulate with workaholism as well,
Mm,
because there's all sorts of forms. Some are more socially acceptable. Again, I could throw myself into my studies, and so I
interesting.
guess it's like a wider question of, like, how do we implement
Yeah.
emotional education and nervous system regulation education into these settings quite organically? How can we do that as an entire nation, really? And it might sound a mean
Mm.
feat, but there are ways.
Yeah, and I think definitely from, again, what I've been hearing through through educators, like I've said, this is something that isn't kind of going away. If anything, it's getting kind of worse in universities,
Yeah.
in general educational settings, but certainly universities and people, students not necessarily feeling like they can cope there, and
Oh
the
gosh, yeah,
referrals are just kind of going up. So the services are just kind of being overwhelmed in a
yeah,
way. So it's almost a preventative measure.
yes, that's
It needs to
exactly it.
be, we need to be, yeah, trying to
Exactly.
prevent it rather than it.
Oh gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true, because
Mm,
a lot of the time we go, well, we don't have the resources, we don't have the staff,
yeah,
and it's like, okay, well, you're going to have the staff and resources for when things
exactly. For
go
when goes
really
wrong.
uh,
Exactly.
awry, because
Mm,
actually implementing this stuff, you're right, it's absolute, it's crime prevention.
mm,
It's deprivation prevention. It's prevention on a wider scale than even people not being able to cope with their studies. But yeah, we have to somehow create a more of a human. I think we're moving in that direction. So many universities are implementing some phenomenal
they are, yeah.
stuff around student support.
Yeah.
I know there's
Yeah.
plenty of amazing projects going on, and it's like, how do we just make that the norm? It
Yes.
shouldn't be isolated
Not
case
the
of, like, oh my
exception.
god, yes. How do we
Yeah.
make that the norm?
Yeah. And then I suppose from that, how do we, so in terms of a young person kind of weighing up risk, reward, their own future when we're talking about university, how would trauma how would trauma kind of feed into that in terms of them making those decisions about themselves and what it is that they want to do?
A really huge factor in the choices we make is how worthy we feel of a life we want to create.
Mm,
And we all have visions in a certain way of what we might like to do. But there's a difference between actually going, oh, I'm going to gun for that, I'm going to go for that, than someone who goes, oh, that's a vision, but I'm not capable. And it's very subconscious and it's very subtle, and we won't always notice that we're going into one of these, we could call them limiting belief systems, limiting ideas that we hold about ourselves. But what really influences the choices we take is our view of who we are in this world, which is shaped by our formative years. It's shaped completely by our developmental years and how safe we feel being us in authentic expression of who we are, how connected to our power we are. And, at the root of so many traumatic experiences in childhood, there has been a felt sense of powerlessness, power that's been taken away. And, that directly impacts how capable someone feels or how far they need to feel they have to modify themselves to get through. Because some people do go into, lots of people with complex trauma do end up at university. Of course. But how it might show up for them, the graft, the drive, the survival mode, it still won't go away. It's a nervous system brace that's going on. And there's many different forms. So working on that felt sense of self is crucial to what choices our young people make with their lives and their education choices.
So I suppose there's two things going on here, isn't there? There's almost like the work to do yourself, within yourself, and then there's also recognizing in others if there are elements of trauma showing up or certain behaviors, and being, like we've spoken about, being more compassionate on that.
Because we can have significant power to affect someone's life trajectory when we're in the educational setting, when we're working with young people or young adults.
Exactly.
The power we hold as, I'm thinking of my support worker that I had when I was in my late teens, Jane Hines from Community Links. She totally changed my life because she didn't mistake my behaviors for who I was in truth, and she connected with me as a human being and believed in me. And she didn't even have to say that with words. She was just present with me. The way she was with me changed my life trajectory and led me on to doing the work I do today. I actually ended up working for Community Links many years later and bumping into her again.
Amazing.
And now I'm connected with her again. But, the power we have with people at that kind of age is very significant. So the more that we can be in a place of knowing that everyone is capable of change and noticing when someone's difficult beliefs might be rising about themselves or they're not quite seeing themselves as capable as they are. Again, we don't go in to try and fix it or change it for them, but being with it and helping someone understand that better themselves, and supporting that emotional side of things is very, very important. And I think this speaks to a wider issue of actually, it'd be really useful for more teachers and lecturers to have this kind of training and knowledge so that they feel confident to have these kind of conversations
when they come up.
Or to spot this stuff, because it's not very fair just sending someone and going, right, have an emotionally deep conversation. It's like, I've only been brought in to lecture on
exactly.
Suddenly but how to have these conversations, there's education that needs to be done within staff teams as well.
Because that was going to almost be my next question. It's, well, practically, how would that then look on the ground? What would we almost do? The tangibles in all of this. It feels so big, doesn't it, in a way?
It really does. And I remember, I dropped out of Leeds College of Art and Design, where I was studying my A-levels after dropping out of school when I was younger, and I was 16 years old. I went to college and dropped out. And again, I went to college the next year and I dropped out because I had to work. I was living on my own from 16. I had to pay my bills, I had to pay my rent, and I couldn't just go. Everyone else was living with their parents. So, interestingly, my tutor, I was doing a photography, psychology, media studies A-levels. My photography tutor came to the fruit and veg shop that I was working in. I was working full time in this fruit and veg shop in the Merrion Centre in Leeds, and Matthew Duckett, he was called. I'll never forget. He came in to the fruit and veg shop because he'd heard from one of the other students I'd dropped out and I was working there. And he came in and he was like, Miranda, like, are you coming back, kind of thing?
Wow.
Are you like, and I do wonder sometimes what it might have looked like, him saying, Miranda, I want to invite you to have a conversation on why you've dropped out. I don't want to put pressure. But I just want to invite you in to just talk about what's going on for you emotionally and in your life. We know you're a kid that's from care. We're aware you'd already dropped out last year. Is there a way we can support you to stay because you're really good at what you do? He did tell me I was really good at what I do, but I just wonder what would have happened if that conversation had been had with me. He did come.
Yeah.
He was amazing. Matthew Duckett, he was amazing, but I do wonder what would have happened, what the trajectory of my life might have looked
So
like.
were you in that position? What were you not in a position to receive that message at that point, or?
I don't think I was, and it would have been very different. I reckon if I was invited in to have that conversation, there was, which obviously wasn't Matthew Duckett's responsibilities. He's already doing outreach. He's coming to the blooming fruit and veg shop I work at to talk to me about why I'm dropping out of college. But I do wonder if there is stuff set up, that could be around not putting pressure on someone to stay, but having those wider conversations on how do we support you to recognize the impact that your choices are going to have on your life. I'm happy with everything, the way it turned out in my life, but looking back, I think I don't want anything to be different than it is, and it's a question that I toss up at least once a month in my mind, like, God,
there's a lot of what ifs, isn't?
What if I hadn't have quit that?
Yeah.
What if I hadn't have quit this?
Yeah.
What if I hadn't have quit this? And I know I shared a story about nearly quitting before I started Heroes in the webinar, but I do wonder, where was the intervention when I was a young person? Where was the intervention?
It takes people who have got, again, the trauma-informed practice and way of being for them to almost spot these behaviours and be able to interject and, be that. It's a sliding doors moment in a way, isn't it?
Honestly, yeah, it is. Yeah.
That might be the catalyst for that person actually staying on, finishing university. And I think particularly for underrepresented students that we work with and look at, they are more highly susceptible to dropping out. Even when they get to university, it's then actually staying the course and being fully supported and being able to stay there. So it's how that could kind of support could show up for them, really.
It really is. And this is an issue about equity, not equality, because it's all very well saying everyone has the equal chance to apply, everyone has the equal chance with whatever. But equity is where actually, if we know and we make sure that we know someone's history, as long as they're willing to share it. We don't have to know someone's medical records, everything that happened in their childhood, blah, 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 blah. But if they identify, they shouldn't need to ever share details of what they've been through. But if they identify that there are additional needs there around potentially confidence, mental health, and as long as that, we communicate that that's confidential, etc., we identify that they are allocated extra support. They are allocated a designated person, for example, or we have to talk about equity here for people who've been through trauma in the educational system. Because again, I do just wonder, I was a very intelligent young girl. Do you know what I mean? I never managed to get through college or university. I'm happy with what I do. I love what I do. I adore having conversations like this. I get great joy. And I know that so much of my, I've done loads of research and study, obviously, myself, and been through many different, et cetera, courses, whatever since. But like, equity wasn't in place because I was a kid living on my own who'd come from care when I was 16. Everyone else was living with their parents.
Yeah.
It was equal. There were equal opportunities. There was not equity.
I like that difference between equity and equal. I think that's a really important distinction to make. And then I'll just circle back to something that we mentioned before I kind of do my final questions. But it was on that this idea of post-traumatic growth. And obviously trauma is something that is very hard to deal with and is kind of a consistent thing that needs to be worked at, and all of that comes with it, not to diminish that at all. But I know you've spoken about the idea that actually through that there are some positives that can be almost like taken, and the resilience that you then have from the experiences. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And post-traumatic growth is a topic I just adore so much. And so many of the people, I know we were having a little chat before this about so many of the people that I was connected with, you know, in my childhood that, you know, I was in hospital with or whatever, who've gone on to do some incredible things, take their pain, make it into purpose.
Yeah.
I do sometimes think they wouldn't have done that had they not have had those life experiences. And so is that a very unique university course? Sometimes people using their suffering because they get it. And there's some stuff you can't learn at university about suffering.
Yeah.
Don't matter how you could study for 8 years to be a psychologist through many textbooks. You can become an expert. Absolutely. You can be an amazing practitioner, not denying that at all. Big disclaimer there, because, you know, you could be an amazing, empathic, compassionate practitioner. At the same time, the learning from a lived experience and the passion that can ignite when it comes to what we talk about as post-traumatic growth can be significant in creating change for others. I know I went to Pride and Diversity Awards last week. I was singing at it. I'm getting back into my music, which I used to be a full-time musician, which is another long story, another long trajectory I've gone on.
Podcast.
Yeah. But, you know, I went to Pride and Diversity Awards, and there it was person after person who winning awards who was sharing, I had cancer and now I've set up this thing for people with cancer. Our child, sadly, you know, committed, well, in fact, I'm not going to use the turn of phrase commit suicide, you know, died by their own hands, I would say. And now we've set up a charity for bereaved parents. We've taking this pain, making it into purpose. And, you know, so, and I'd say that's an aspect of post-traumatic growth. And, you know, sometimes the people that I've worked with that have had the most significant traumas, sometimes traumatic experiences they've been through, there's just so many more opportunities to work with what's rising in them. You know, a lot of people might never look at their stuff. They might never look at their conditioning because they're gliding along and they're quite content in their lives. But when there's someone that's been to their knees, where it's been like, oh my God, my life is shattered, there has to be another way. They're the people that sometimes create the biggest change. And I know for me, the biggest changes I've made in my life have been in times of like having an actual nervous breakdown or being in complete crisis. They're the times where it's been like, I have to find another way.
I have to do something.
And I wouldn't have had that if it wasn't for the levels of suffering that I'd been through. So it's a difficult one when you're going through the mill, but there is always a glimmer there. And even if it's a millimetre out of a metre that we hold a little bit of hope and belief, that's what we focus on. And that is what we grow then. Okay. So it's, and that's post-traumatic growth in a nutshell for me. Yeah. Or maybe not in a nutshell, a very big nut. It's a massive nut, that
one. Indeed. Thank you for sharing that. And then I suppose I'd really love to end on, you know, sharing something that's actually obviously anonymized, but almost sharing a story that's almost genuinely changed the outcome for someone. So on your programs, and almost the power of what this kind of work can do, and how it can change people's lives. Really, I imagine that's what we're talking about, isn't it? It's changing people's trajectories and lives and endpoints. It'd be great to kind of, I imagine you've got quite a lot.
It's significant. You know, the person that really comes to mind off the top of my head is a patient that we had through the Bermatofts, High Hills and Richmond Hill Primary Care Network at Bellbrook Surgery, who I saw in lockdown when I was first creating Heroes, teaching her self-compassionate practice. And she had pericarditis. She'd suffered with pericarditis. It was like heart issue. I don't know the exact details of it. She suffered with it for over 8 years. She'd been through severe domestic violence. She'd sought asylum in this country. She had 2 young kids on her own. She'd gone through, she's gone through unthinkable things in her life, really suffering with pericarditis. Started implementing self-compassionate practice. Now, this is not an aim. This is not something we aim for, like dramatic miracles of health outcome, physical health outcomes. But this is, a genuine story of this patient. And she went back for her check after going through Heroes, and using these methods. I kept seeing her on a one-to-one basis following that in my role in the surgery. And within about a year, she went back and the specialist was like, oh my God, there's not an issue anymore.
Wow.
And she literally put it down to the way she was being, holding her hands over her heart space, practicing with the SAVE method, practicing self-compassionate practice. When she'd noticed stress going off in her body and being able to regulate her nervous system in that way, physical health problems happened. And the other amazing thing is she then got employed by the GP surgery that she was attending groups in.
Wow. Wow.
She became a patient ambassador herself.
Yeah.
She went on to set up groups at Shine Business Centre for women who'd been through domestic violence and who were seeking asylum in this country. And the healing is spreading. She's now giving motivational talks to patients within that primary care network.
Oh, amazing.
She's set up the group's called Women to Women at Shine Business Centre. She's having women coming in, sharing their own businesses and empowering, and the healing is now spreading outwards. That's such a dramatic, significant change that she had, and navigating her life in a way better relationship with herself. And that is not an isolated incident. We've had many dramatic physical and mental health healing stories, so yeah, this work works, doing that deeper work with ourselves and just knowing recovery is always possible. Recovery is not an end point to get to where we're suddenly healed and fixed. We never feel fear and shame and pain again because they're human emotions. But the healing happens when we learn how to work with them instead of fight against them. But yeah, recovery is always possible. And I guess that's a really great story to end on, sharing that, her recovery is ongoing, but she's shining a big light out in the world. But now she's recognised her power and she's experiencing great post-traumatic growth.
Oh, amazing. I love that. We've tied it all back together.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
So where can people find you, follow you? We'll put some links in the show notes to some of this stuff, but you're on LinkedIn, you've got your website.
I am indeed, yes. So it's Miranda Arieh, Miranda, and my surname's Arieh, and I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I'm always here on the end of an email as well. If anyone did want to get in touch, I don't always respond straight away, but I do always aim to get back to all emails. So feel free to get in touch and link in with me on those socials.
Brilliant. So we will share all those details in the show notes. So thank you so much, Miranda. I've genuinely really, really enjoyed this conversation. It's been so insightful, so fascinating. I've learned so much, and there's definitely things I'm going to kind of take away into my work, into my personal life, everything. So thank you for sharing. And to everybody listening, thank you for being with us. You can find out more work about the Hidden Drivers of Choice study that I mentioned earlier on as well. We'll link all of that in the show notes. So Miranda is also consulting on that project with us as well. But until next time, look after yourself, guys, and speak soon.